Hello, everybody. My name is Marissa Ghavami, and I'm an artist and an advocate and a creator. And notably, I am the founder and CEO of the nonprofit called Healing Tree. Healing Tree stands for Healing Trauma Resources, Education, and Empowerment. And we are all about promoting healing from abuse and trauma rather than just coping with the symptoms. We do this by providing trauma-focused resources and education, and by producing and partnering with relevant film, TV, and theater to help create the social change necessary to start this healing movement. So I'm very, very grateful to the Mighty for giving me this platform today, and for everybody who's tuning in. I am really grateful to connect with all of you. And we're gonna be talking about using healing trauma techniques during tough times. So I want to acknowledge that this talk is going on during a very pivotal moment in our history. Black Lives Matter is getting the attention that it deserves, and we need to go even further. And I know that many people are suffering for many reasons, including the ongoing pandemic. And so I just want to be mindful of that and be just aware while we're talking today. So firstly, I just want to tell you guys a little bit about myself and why I have this trauma-focused perspective. I grew up working, I've always loved the arts, and I've been privileged enough to work professionally in them since I was a kid. I had a pretty awesome time growing up until my late adolescence, when I had kind of tragedy strike. I underwent some severe abuse and trauma, and I ended up having a complex PTSD and psychogenic non-epileptic seizure diagnosis. Those were lucky diagnoses because I had symptoms of just about every mental illness and several physical illnesses. And so I was very fortunate to get trauma-focused treatment. And I was told things like, hey, it's not about what is wrong with you, it's about what happened to you. And our brains are experiential organs, and neuroplasticity is real. So even though you find yourself quite shattered right now and experiencing an array of very distressing symptoms, you can get well, because our brains can rewire even into adulthood if we give them the proper care. So after about 5 years of receiving things like EMDR, which stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, things like somatic experiencing, sensory motor psychotherapy, brain spotting, and then doing a lot of my own work, which included mindfulness, yoga. I didn't do drama therapy, but I was in a theater school at the time, so I sort of did journaling, writing, et cetera, et cetera. I made a complete recovery from the complex PTSD and the psychogenic non-epileptic seizures. I am not on medication, not that there's anything wrong with that, and I'm experiencing no symptoms today and have not for over 5 years. So I was extremely grateful that I had this healing, but I also learned a lot, and my eyes were really opened to quite a lot that told me that so many other people do not get the same response that I got from my therapist and do not get the same information. I learned that the majority of mental health providers, about 90%, are not trained in trauma-focused treatment modalities. And so they're looking at this DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual of Mental Illness, and they are looking at things like anxiety, depression, bipolar, eating disorders, OCD, the list goes on and on and on. And they're not necessarily looking at the trauma that is most likely underneath those things. When I say most likely, I'm looking at the research from the trauma studies field, and I'm also looking at the 17,000 person Kaiser Permanente adverse childhood experiences study and neuroscience. And so I learned that a lot of people were just being labeled, which there's nothing wrong with a diagnosis if it's helpful, but if it tells somebody something that is not based on neuroplasticity, and it makes people feel like they are broken and that they will never get better, they just have to manage their symptoms the rest of their lives, I just offer a new perspective from the trauma studies field. And so I started looking around me, and I realized so many people weren't getting this information, whether it was friends, family members, neighbors, whether it was people experiencing homelessness, people who were suicidal, veterans, people who just had different life experiences and did not have the same resources that I did. And I thought, well, it's not fair that I'm being given these tools and this chance, and they're not. And so I wanted to volunteer with an organization that was doing something about it. And I found amazing trauma organizations who were providing great care in their areas. And I found amazing organizations maybe against a certain type of abuse, like domestic violence or for mental illness. But I couldn't find one that just said, hey, trauma, whether it's childhood neglect, emotional abuse, rape, assault, war, natural disasters, systemic oppression, workplace bullying, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's a fact of life for almost all of us. And it impacts our brain the same way. And in order to solve many of these issues in our society, from mental illness, addictions, violence, et cetera, we've got to deal with the root issue. So when I couldn't find that organization that was making this knowledge from the trauma studies field public knowledge not just for professionals and helping professionals, but for the general public, since it affects almost all of us, I thought, well, I'm going to start it. And so that is how Healing Tree came to be. And so I just wanted to share with you guys that everything that I'm going to share today comes from that perspective, comes from that background. So I see that we have some comments. So I just want to say hello, everybody. Awesome. Yeah, there are a lot of people being misdiagnosed out there. Yeah. Someone says, Sandy says, I actually have no mental disorder. I've just been holding my emotions in for 20 years. I think that that's so important for us to look at when, before we label ourselves as being broken or crazy or something's wrong with us. I think it's really important for us to look at what has happened in our lives. How does that affect us? Because a lot of times, you're right, emotions can get trapped, and we know that trauma stays in our bodies. And if it is not released and processed, and not just cognitively, right? Because trauma isn't just a cognitive issue. Trauma impacts us in our reptilian brain, in our amygdala, and our survival brain. So even if we have a cognitive understanding of why we are the way we are, why we feel what we feel or do what we do, that's not really the part of our brain that's injured in trauma. And so it doesn't necessarily help us heal or process. It just helps us cope and manage. So I'm really glad to hear that, that people are resonating with that. I want to start with just a little bit of a group check-in. So please type in how you guys are doing this week. Like I said at the beginning of our session today, I know that there's a lot going on in the world that is affecting so many people, especially Black folks, and we've got to just honor that and do our best to hold space for those who are most affected by what's going on right now. So I just want to open it up. Tell me in the chat how you're doing, because we're going to go into a guided meditation soon. And what I like to do is just insert some things into the guided meditation that are meeting people where they are right now. So if I see some themes coming up, maybe you're feeling anxious or depressed, scared, overwhelmed, whatever it is, I want to meet those needs by working them into the meditation. So type some things in that you want to see me cover. And as people are letting me know how they're doing this week, I'm just going to share that what we're going to be doing in this meditation is very trauma-informed, and not just trauma-informed, because that's becoming a buzzword, but it's very trauma-focused. What I mean by that is that we're really going to target the part of the brain that I mentioned a minute ago. We're going to target our survival brain, right? The part of our brain where trauma actually impacts us. So what does that look like? And why are we doing that? Because if we are, say, driving down the street and a car almost hits us and we instinctively go, right? That's not us thinking, oh no, here comes a car. I'm going to very quickly turn my wheel to avoid hitting it. That's an instinctive, a 60th of a second reaction, right? When the car doesn't hit us, hopefully, thankfully, we keep driving, and a few minutes later, our heart rate will slow back down. Maybe we won't feel that dry mouth feeling. Maybe we won't feel our stomach. This is the kitty. This is Sebastian. We won't feel our stomach up in our throat. we'll start to feel safe again. What happens if we live in a war zone? What happens if that war zone is our own home? When we are in that sort of fight or flight response day after day, after week, after month, after year, our cognitive brain doesn't always take back over and calm us down and regulate our nervous systems. Sometimes we stay stuck in fight or flight. And it's not just fight or flight. It's fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And we can experience an array of symptoms to try to protect us from feeling the fullness of the fear that we felt in moments of trauma. But when that isn't processed, we can just be experiencing those symptoms over and over and over again. Whether it shows up as numbing out, dissociative symptoms, addictive symptoms, depressive symptoms, anxious symptoms, phobias, whatever it may be, those things can just run rampant, and we can feel like we can't control them with our minds, no matter how much we try. And we often feel shame for that. So in the meditation, we're going to be using some techniques to bring our thinking brains back online by focusing on and noticing without judgment what's happening in our amygdalas. So we have some responses here. Let's see, meditation has been helpful for people stressed about going back to work. I'm going to take some notes so that I don't forget to put some of these things into the guided meditation. So we're feeling some stress, managing effects of trauma. Sure, grew up in an abusive situation. Thank you so much. It's awesome that you're using your experiences to heal others. I try it. It gives me some sort of meaning for them. Changing my feelings and thoughts as I'm getting involved in the Black Lives Matter movement that should have happened years ago. Awesome. Yes, I think for so many people, we feel that way. So sad, angry, and frustrated. Yes. Doing okay, having suicidal thoughts, depression and anxiety, schizoaffective, PTSD too. If we can put a suicide lifeline up on the screen, that would be really helpful for anyone who is feeling that. Had labels, PTSD, bipolar depression, anxious and depressed. We're going to definitely work that in. Stress, anxiety, depression, tough time, suicidal thoughts. I'm very sorry to hear that so many people are going through that right now. I think, thank you for putting that up on the screen. Ashley is helping us out behind the scenes. I think, just to offer some hope, when I was going through PTSD years ago, I certainly was in that boat as well. And I remember asking my mom if I would ever smile again. This was about 10 years ago. Now I feel like I can't stop smiling. And so while I would never say that my story is guaranteed for everyone, what I do know is a bit about the neuroscience that says that neuroplasticity, or the brain's ability to rewire into adulthood, is just a scientific fact. So I know that there is hope that our brains can rewire and move towards healing, regardless of what we're affected by. It's important to note that genetic predispositions are real and chemical imbalances are real. What is also real is that our genes are activated by life experiences. Our genes are literally downregulated or upregulated, and trauma is a huge part of that. Also, our chemicals are changed by life experiences. So that is also real. So I just want to offer that up for some hope. Lifetime of healing, ready to live. Physical reactions, yes, so important. I've never heard of fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Thank you. Yeah, freeze and fawn are super important. Freeze is super deep, and fawn is actually kind of a facet of trauma bonding, which I think is such an important term. We might be able to talk a little bit about that later for those of us who aren't as familiar with it, because so many of us feel attached and loyal to people who have hurt us, who have abused us, who have been toxic towards us, and we don't know why. Oftentimes we take on that shame. It's trauma bonding. So just want to offer that up to one of these comments. All right, so I think we've gotten a lot of responses for how people are doing. Here's another kitty. This one's named Phyla. We might have some animal visitors today. So I think we have had some pretty good responses about how people are feeling right now, and I think we are good to go into the meditation. If you're joining late, or if you just think of something that you would like us to cover, I will do my best to keep watching the comments and to work that into the meditation as well. So I want to thank Dr. David Grand, who developed brain spotting, which is a trauma-focused technique for giving me permission to use some of his sound. It is bilateral sound, so if you had this on your earbuds, it would be giving you bilateral beats, which would be really helpful. We don't have that access right now, but I am using this music with his permission. So just going to turn on some hopefully relaxing sound in the background. And I'm gonna ask you guys, if you feel comfortable, to join me in this mindfulness-based guided meditation. And we're gonna start by just getting comfortable. So get physically comfortable first. If you need to unbutton the top button of your pants if it's too tight, if you need to take a sip of water, anything you need to do to get physically comfortable. Maybe stretch out any tight muscles. Make sure that there are little to no distractions. And if you are new to mindfulness or meditation, I want to assure you that there's no right or wrong way to do it, that it's a practice. If you think I can't do meditation or I always get distracted, that's okay. It's just a practice. And if anything feels unsafe or uncomfortable, don't do it. This is all just a suggestion and up to you. Viola might join us for that too. So this is going to help us self-regulate. It's going to help us feel more fully. So many of us, when we are feeling some undesired emotions or unwanted emotions, we repress those. Unfortunately, what ends up happening is that our more positive or desired emotions get repressed as well. So we're going to start by closing our eyes, if that's comfortable. I'm going to keep mine open so I can keep an eye on any comments that come in. And we're going to take some deep breaths into our diaphragm. So instead of breathing into our chests and letting our shoulders rise, taking a high breath, let's introduce a lower breath, a deep belly breath, or into our diaphragm. So when we breathe in through our nose, our diaphragm expands. And when we breathe out, also through our nose, it goes back in. Let's take a couple of those. Notice what you're feeling. Keep with that slow, deep belly breath. Notice if any emotions come up for you, desired or undesired. Notice if any physical sensations come up for you. Tightness, pain, discomfort. All the while, keep that slow, deep belly breath. And notice if any thought patterns come up for you. Maybe it is difficult for you to focus. Maybe you're having a loop of anxiety. Just notice it. Now we're going to go into some Bateko breathing. If this is comfortable for you, I invite you to join me, as it can really help regulate our nervous systems quickly. We're going to breathe in on a 2 count through our nose into our bellies, and we're going to release on a 5 count out through our nose. 2, 3, 4, 5. Now we're going to hold for 5, not breathing in or out. 3, 4, 5, and then we're going to go back to normal breath in and out. We're going to do that a few times. Breathe in for 2, out for 5. Hold for 5. In and out normally. Twice more. In for 2. Notice what you're feeling. Out for 5. Notice where it sits in your body. Hold for 5. In and out normally. Last time. In for 2. Out for 5. Hold for 5. In and out normally. Now let's just go back to the deep, slow belly breaths. And whatever you came up with, if it's an emotion, if it's a physical sensation, if it's a thought pattern, maybe it's all 3, I'd like you to use your thinking brain, the part of your brain you use to talk and reason, to just focus on it. This may be counterintuitive. We may be used to pushing these undesired emotions, physical sensations, and thought patterns away. I want to offer an alternative, which is just being mindfully aware of what these sensations are. Without judgment, and to the best of our ability, without shaming ourselves, for whatever comes up. Can we sit with these emotions without refusing them their space? Maybe they're trying to tell us something. Maybe they want to communicate. This is a form of sensory motor psychotherapy. I like to call it targeted mindfulness. Can we be mindful of that which we do not desire? If we can be present with these undesired sensations, we'll often find that we can be more present with the desired sensations. Now, whatever that emotion is for you, stress, anxiety, depression, worry, fear, guilt, shame, whatever the physical sensations are that go along with it, pain, discomfort, dis-ease, tension, whatever the thought patterns are, I'm not enough, I'm bad, I'm doing this wrong, I can't focus, this won't work for me. Can we just sit with them? Continue those slow, deep breaths. Now I'm going to introduce some inner child work. Just briefly. Many of us, when we were growing up, were told really toxic messages about our undesired emotions. If we cried, we were told that we were maybe being babies, or if we were men, that we needed to man up. If we expressed anger, maybe we were told that wasn't appropriate, or that we were being bad. Maybe we were told we were too sensitive or too needy. Maybe not just when we were growing up, maybe in a toxic relationship. Maybe we internalized these feelings and these messages, and we started telling ourselves these things. Can we notice if any of these toxic messages about how we are to handle our unwanted emotions are coming up when we're sitting with these emotions? Now, I'd like us to imagine ourselves as children in our mind's eye. Whatever our most vulnerable age or stage was, what did we need to hear when we were feeling our most vulnerable, when we were feeling our most exposed and our most undesired emotions come up? When we were enraged or fearful, when we were crying, grieving, scared, anxious, unhappy, when something wrong happened. What were we told? How did that affect us? Now, what did we want to be told? As we're sitting with these emotions, I'm going to offer an opportunity, if you'd like, to join me in trying to rewrite that script just a little bit. So if we were told you're too sensitive, or don't be a crybaby, or something like that, can we tell ourselves now, in our mind's eye, envisioning our inner child, what we wanted and needed and deserved to hear? You're not too much, perhaps. Perhaps I believe you. Perhaps it's okay to cry. Perhaps I would be mad too. I'm going to give us about a minute of silence. I encourage you to keep those slow, deep belly breaths and breathe into the sensations that are coming up. You may notice the negative or unwanted emotions coming up more. Of course, if it feels unsafe, stop. If it just feels uncomfortable, I encourage you to stick with it for a little bit. See if this actually helps it process out, because they're in there. So for the next minute, can we tell ourselves in our mind's eye, or you're welcome to say it out loud if you want, speaking to our inner child, our most vulnerable core self, what we needed to hear during those moments, and perhaps what we need to hear right now. Let's take about a minute to do that. All right, and just notice how that was for you. And now let's move into, what are our desired emotions? What are our desired physical sensations? What are our desired thought patterns? Sometimes we try to change these states, and we do so just with our cognitive mind. But often these states are coming from our survival brain, and so we need to change the feelings, and we often feel like we can't. Of course, trauma-focused treatment modalities, which we'll talk about later, can help that on an ongoing basis. But for some of us, it may be enough to get a little bit of relief by shifting through our imagination how we feel in the present moment without necessarily changing our outside circumstances. So, while honoring whatever we're feeling, even if it's undesired, and sitting with that, we can also use our imaginations and think about, what are our desired emotions, physical sensations, and thought patterns, and what would it take for us to feel that? For instance, it may be that unemployment check coming through finally, to feel more secure. It may be connecting with loved ones, hearing an apology, getting a massage. Whatever it may be for you, can you imagine in your mind's eye, in the same way you imagined your inner child, those things happening, and then feel into it in the present moment through deep breathing. Breathe into those more desired emotions, physical sensations, and thought patterns. Maybe it is mental clarity. Can you imagine what that would feel like? Maybe it's a pain-free body. What would that feel like? Maybe it's peace, joy, gratitude. Maybe it's presence. What would that feel like? Breathe into that. As if it is happening right now, try to allow yourselves to feel the fullness of those desired sensations right now. I'm going to give about another minute. This time, play out whatever scenario it is for you that helps you feel your most desired state. Continue to breathe deeply into your tummy. If negative messages come up, just notice them instead of pushing them away. Be the observer, if you can. If you get distracted, just come back to the breath and gently remind yourself that you're suggesting a situation that would allow for a more desired emotional state. All right, just notice how that felt for you. Sometimes if we can begin to allow ourselves to feel differently, even just through our imaginations, it's easier for our thoughts to then match those feelings. Now, in the next minute, I'd like us to feel some gratitude for essential workers and healthcare workers who are on the front lines of this pandemic. Perhaps we know someone who's a nurse or a doctor. We can take these desired emotions. It's a nice segue into gratitude for those who are doing so much for us to stay safe and well. Perhaps we have some of those people in the chat today. We can just feel the gratitude for their work. Breathing into that. And now, for our last minute, let's reflect on the fact that Black lives matter. For Black folks on this call or in this chat, I invite you to meditate on perhaps brainstorming one self-care thing you can do for yourself today. One thing that you need to care for you. For white folks on this call and other non-Black folks on this call, I invite you to meditate on and brainstorm one actionable step that you can take today to fight racial injustice. I also invite, especially the white folks on this chat, to think about opening your hearts and your minds to listening Black folks to trying to understand and to empathize, to educate ourselves so that we do not remain in ignorance and be a part of the problem, whether it's intentional or not. Just spend the next 20 seconds or so. Like I said, I invite Black folks on the call to think of one self-care thing you can do for yourself today. And white, especially, and other non-Black folks on the call to think of one action item you can take today to actively fight racism. And now, come back to the breath. Let's do 2 potato breaths. Breathe in and out normally to catch the rhythm first. And then breathe in on a 2 count. Breathe out on a 5. Hold for 5. In and out normally. Last one. In for 2. Out for 5. Hold for 5. And in and out normally. And now, I'm going to turn down the music. I'm going to invite you to open your eyes and come back to the present moment and the group, and let me know in the chat how that was for you. What you liked, maybe what you didn't like. Like I said, so often when we are repressing our negative or undesired emotions, we are just causing them to build up in our bodies and to bubble over into symptoms of mental illness, of pain, of addiction, disease. And when we allow ourselves to feel all of our feelings more fully, we then can actually have the more desired states that we're seeking and that we're trying to get by pushing those negative sensations down. When we sit with our unwanted emotions, we can actually help process them, help move them from short to long-term memory so that they're not just spinning around begging to be validated. When we use techniques like deep breathing, Buteyko breathing, mindfulness, meditation, we can begin to self-regulate as opposed to just trying to force ourselves into behaving the way we want. When we meet our brains where they need to be met, in our survival brain, when we deal with those reactions, we are allowing our brains what we need to heal. If we had physical therapy after a car accident and our back went out, but we only had physical therapy on our leg, it would be no wonder why it was not very effective. But when we just deal cognitively with things that happen in our survival brains, we often get mad at ourselves and think that we're broken if we can't fix ourselves. And we're not. We just need to give ourselves that proper care. Someone asks, is there any way to have a copy of the music? My recommendation is to Google Dr. David Grand, bilateral sound. And this came from something called Inner Mirror Bilateral, Disc 2, and it's called Sound Waves. So it came out in 1999, my iTunes says. I'm not sure. But if you do a YouTube search or on iTunes for Dr. David Grand and bilateral sound, you may be able to get something very similar. Imagined confidence for a minute felt really good. I think that that's really cool, that we can use our imaginations to do something like that. I mentioned briefly that I've worked as an actress since I was a kid. I've worked in theater, in film, in television, and imagination is how we're trained, or how a lot of actors are trained. So for me, it's kind of second nature to imagine a scenario in my mind. For people who do not have that training, sometimes I think we even get shamed for daydreaming, right? But our imagination is so powerful. And if we can just feel into a desired state, I often notice, and there's some neuroscience to back this up. Dr. Joe Dispenza does brilliant work on this, that when we are feeling a certain way, it's a lot easier for our thoughts to start thinking in line with those more positive or desired feelings. Someone says, my husband has depression and anxiety, can't handle when I cry or I'm upset. I'm open on how I'm feeling. He runs away from his and mine. I'm sorry to hear that. Somebody says, oh, you're a theater kid. No wonder I felt like I already knew you. There we go. I love that. So back to Michelle's comment, I think that's a really important segue. We're going to go into some mental health tips, boundary setting, and healthy relationships. I think that so often when we are unhappy and unwell, we overlook the importance of those closest to us and how they may be affecting our state. This doesn't mean that we don't let people be imperfect and hold space for their own mental health issues. But it does mean that if somebody is being toxic to us or not nurturing to us or shaming to us, that if we take a look at our own boundaries, if we take a look at our own maybe unresolved trauma bonding issues, that we may be in a place to better care for ourselves and protect ourselves so that we don't get pulled down into something that is a state that we don't want to be in. Somebody says, I will explain the difference of PTSD and complex PTSD in just a second. Yes. When we are being told that we're not allowed to feel our feelings fully by someone that we love and that we're close to, that can have an enormous impact on us. So trauma bonding, which is something that I talked about earlier, may or may not be the case here, but it is good to bring up because when we're talking about mental health tips, so much of our mental health comes from relationship. So when we are in situations where there's a power imbalance, maybe like a parent-child, doesn't have to be though, can certainly be in a marriage, in a dating relationship, with a teacher, with a friend, when there's intermittent reward and punishment. Sometimes they're love bombing us and they're really great, and sometimes they're devaluing us. Certainly with narcissistic abuse, this is just a classic pattern. Domestic violence, certainly this happens often. When we're in a cycle of that reward and punishment, of the honeymoon phase, the love bombing, then the build up, then an inciting incident of abuse, and then the apology, and then back up here, our equilibrium gets off balance, and we are just trying to make things normal. And so if someone is shaming us, then oftentimes we will, in those moments of fear, which becomes fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, and this is more the fawn response, we can begin to agree with them and begin to take on, oh, I am wrong. Oh, I did deserve that. Oh, I am bad. If I think this, and if I say this, will you just stop? Can I just get the equilibrium back? And so again, not insinuating that that is the case here in any way, but since we brought up relationships, I just wanted to mention that since I briefly mentioned it earlier. And when we're talking about mental health tips, if we notice ourselves being attracted to or attached to or loyal to anyone who is harming us in any way, even if it's unintentional, because I think so many people who have their own mental health issues, their own unresolved trauma, can be unintentionally harmful to us. If we can take a look at that, and I firmly encourage to take a look at that with a trauma-focused therapist, but there are also some great books that we can look at. There's something called The Betrayal Bond by Patrick Carnes. There's a book called Why Does He Do That? These books are listed on Healing Tree's site as well under our resources. Then it might help us with our own mental health to examine that. Someone asks the concept of PTSD and versus complex PTSD. PTSD has, so let's say, this is going to be a very quick explanation, this many symptoms, right? Complex PTSD has about this many. When we have a single trauma, say a really bad car accident, or it could be, you know, a natural disaster, or it could be a single assault, versus when we have years of abuse, say growing up with child abuse or living in domestic violence, then the response to that is different. And it not only affects things like nightmares and flashbacks and some of the more kind of textbook PTSD responses, but it also affects how we see ourselves and the world. And there are a whole slew of symptoms that can be body-based as well, that can be dissociative, that can also show up with complex PTSD. So talking about the mental health tips, additionally to the relationship stuff, what can we do to help ourselves feel better every day? Certainly if we notice any of those sort of relationship red flags that we might be in a trauma bonded situation, boundary setting is essential. It is really hard for us to heal and to stay regulated if we are in a toxic situation. So removing ourselves or distancing ourselves from something that may be toxic is certainly one way to sort of instantly up our mental health. It may be hard, so I don't want to say instantly as in that's going to solve all your problems, but what I mean by that is if we're constantly being told negative messages and then we distance from those negative messages, it can be amazing to see what happens when we're not getting that negative input. Somebody says, thank you for your explanation, of course. You're so right, grief and trauma are 100% emotional and responses from our primitive brain. Trying to resolve or heal with our intellect is futile, can lead to more discouragement or hopelessness. Honoring our feelings and emotions without judgment is vital towards moving forward. Yes, agree, thank you. Then we're talking about more ways that we can affect our mental health just on the daily. So I like to start my day with morning pages. The person who said you're a theater kid might appreciate this. So morning pages, this concept comes from a book called The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. And the idea is that you just wake up in the morning and write 3 pages of whatever is in your mind. So it doesn't need to be smart, it doesn't need to be good, it doesn't need to be right, it doesn't need to be anything that you will ever read again or want anyone else to read. You can rip it up after you're done. It should be unedited and unfiltered, and it just comes out and you just write it down. And the reason is that it allows you to get whatever's in your mind on a page so you can even see what you're working with. I like to do that before a morning meditation because then I know what I might need to meditate on. And I'm always amazed by just giving myself 10, 15 minutes to write what that does for me for the rest of the day, and what that reveals to me. I also like to do gratitude journaling at night, and that can sound silly or cliche for some people. I honor that. I want to offer up that in the same way that when we were doing the meditation, when we're feeling the feelings that we want to feel now in the present moment, and how that allows our thoughts to shift sometimes, when we are using gratitude journaling, it can allow ourselves to feel more positively so that our thoughts that we begin to attract are more positive as well. And when we're doing so, I want to encourage us to actually feel into why we're grateful. So instead of just being like, okay, food, shelter, animals, husband, like whatever we're writing down, right, job, and we're just writing it down like a list, if we actually feel why we're grateful, what those things add to our lives, right, then that can actually start changing us on a more felt sense level than just, again, a cognitive level. I also think that clean eating, while not about diet culture, being thin, being cute, looking good, not about that, but clean eating about reducing inflammation, which can lead to or exacerbate depression, is really important because the gut-brain connection is real. It's just science. So a plant-based diet is certainly one option, but I think, whole foods and nourishing our bodies instead of pouring junk into them, again, not about a diet or restricting ourselves, but about nourishing ourselves and honoring the fact that what is in our bellies does affect what's in our brains, can be very important. Same thing with exercise, not about looking a certain way, but about helping our brains produce chemicals like serotonin that we need to feel good, right? And then the other thing is using this sort of targeted mindfulness or a form of sensory motor psychotherapy throughout our days. It doesn't have to be in a morning and evening meditation. I like to do that. I recommend it, even if you start with 5 minutes. But it can also be when we're doing the dishes, when we're taking the dog for a walk, when we are getting ready in the morning. It doesn't have to be a separate time. It can be something that we just check in with ourselves throughout the day, whenever, anytime. How that can look is, you're washing a dish and you're just thinking to yourself, what do I feel right now? Do I feel any undesired emotions? Where do those sit in my body? Do I have any unwanted thought patterns? Do I have any physical tension? Can I notice it? Can I notice it without judgment? Can I sit with it? And can that be okay with me? And the more we can tolerate all of ourselves, the more we can self-regulate throughout our days and the more space we have. So here's a cup, and you can't see, well, a mug. My water's to about here. Say that this is unresolved childhood trauma. Say that this is unresolved dating or relationship trauma. Say that this is the pandemic. Say that this is what your boss just said to you today. Say that this is what your kids just did that stressed you out. Say that this is, not getting that unemployment check. Whatever it is that adds to your stress, if the water isn't poured out pretty regularly, which would be processing those emotions and moving them from short to long-term memory, which is what we do with brain-body-based therapy, like the ones I mentioned earlier. I'll mention them again. EMDR, brain spotting, sensory motor psychotherapy, somatic experiencing. Those are all brain-body-based therapies that I recommend looking into for trauma. If we don't dump that out, it will overflow. And once it overflows, that's when our capacity to cope is overwhelmed. That is one definition of trauma. When we get into that zone, we become symptomatic with mental illness, with sometimes physical illness, with addictive qualities, behavioral problems, whatever it may be. So the more we can use these mindfulness-based techniques throughout the day, these are little ways that we can help dump a little bit of that water out. So I just want to open up the last few minutes to any final questions. And I want to say that you can find a lot of helpful resources on Healing Tree's website. I believe that we will put that up on the screen. And if you believe in the work that we're doing, which is essentially trying to make this trauma knowledge public knowledge and make healing rather than coping the new normal, then please consider supporting us and donating if you're able. Again, it's healingtreenonprofit.org, which I think will be right up on the screen. Thank you again, Ashley. Also, beyond the resources that we have online, we have lots of articles, books, videos. We have an approved care network of therapists that we've vetted and made sure that they are trained in these treatment modalities, PSAs, short films, lots of stuff on there. In addition, I'm live every Sunday on the Healing Tree Facebook page, which is facebook.com/healingtreenonprofit.org. Somebody's saying, what's the link? It is in the chat. So in our Facebook, I'm live every Sunday at noon Eastern Standard Time, doing something similar to what I did today. So if you enjoyed it and want to make this a weekly practice, that is another free resource, facebook.com/healingtreenonprofit.org. Ashley just put it up. Thank you. And also another resource is I have just begun officially offering healing trauma-focused coaching and consulting. So coaching that does not replace therapy, though I can work with your therapist if everybody approves of that. But it can be just on something specific like business coaching, or in the arts, since I've worked professionally in a variety of areas in the arts, through a trauma-focused lens, or it could be just general life, wellness, work, relationship coaching through a trauma-focused lens, using the techniques and tools that I have learned from over 10 years of research and lived experience, healing from complex PTSD and psychogenic non-epileptic seizures and a whole other slew of symptoms like I mentioned, and helping you outside of therapy use those tools that I have learned to help yourself heal rather than cope. I also provide the consulting, and that is for arts professionals, that is for organizations, businesses, corporations that want a more trauma-focused approach and insight. So if you're an arts professional, and let's put that link up. That is, you can find more about this at marissaghavami.com/coach. There we go, -consultant. So the consulting could be for arts professionals who want to write about or deal with these topics in their work, for organizations making their culture and environment more trauma sensitive. So that's another resource. And then you can follow me on social media at Marissa Ghavami on Instagram, and facebook.com/Marissa Ghavami. And then you can follow Healing Tree on social media at healingtree.org on Instagram, and facebook.com/healingtreenonprofit.org on Facebook. So if there are any questions, again, I'm here to answer them for a few more minutes, but you can connect with me in these ways. Reach out if you want to learn more, reach out if you want to work with me. Join our lives on Sundays on Healing Tree. I hope to come back on the Mighty as well. And join this healing movement, because I think that when we want to change the world and heal the world, we have to start with ourselves first. And certainly one way to do that is getting to the root of our issues, which for so many of us is often just life stuff, right? And so many times we just think, oh, I wasn't traumatized. I don't want to put myself in that category. Trauma doesn't have to be some huge big T trauma thing, right? Like rape or war or a natural disaster. It can also be little T trauma. So it can also be a lot of little things. And just acknowledging that it's a fact of life, and it's okay to call it what it is, and it's okay to acknowledge that life experiences hurt us and impact us. And when we do so, not only is it okay, but it allows us really to move forward and heal and be more present in our own lives, be more present to help be there for others and for the world. Thank you. People are writing in the links. Thank you so much. So if there are no last minute questions, I just want to thank you guys so much for spending an hour of your day with me. I really am grateful. And I just want to reiterate that Black Lives Matter. If that statement makes you uncomfortable, I encourage you to do some research. I encourage you to, there's a great article, if you just Google it. I don't have the link right here, so I don't know if Ashley does, but it's 75 things that white people can do for racial justice. It's on Medium. That's one article. There's tons of them out there. Inform yourselves. Do your part to not be ignorant to what is going on and what has been going on for a painfully long time. And I want to reiterate that it's okay to not be okay. Oh, we got it. Thank you so much. It's okay to not be okay. It's okay for trauma to have impacted us. It's okay if we feel overwhelmed. And there are ways to heal. You're not broken. It's not about what's wrong with you. Oftentimes it's about what happened to you. And there is hope when we honor that our brains can rewire, when we honor that experiences can be processed. And so I just want to leave everybody with that hope today, that if you are feeling overwhelmed, broken, shattered, that it can get better, and that I highly encourage you to check out our site and dive into some trauma-focused stuff. So thank you all so much for joining me today, and I hope to see you guys again. And thank you to the Mighty for having me. Thank you, Ashley, for helping out with all these links and for inviting me to join you guys today. I hope you all have a beautiful rest of your Friday.